Picture this. It's about 10:13 p.m. on a Tuesday night, and you have a massive history test tomorrow that you have not studied for yet. Go figure. But just as you are about to start going over the study guide the teacher gave you, your phone buzzes. It's a notification that your friend has just posted a new video. Well, I'll take a quick look, you think to yourself. Just 1 minute. 2 hours later, you are exhausted, but you're still scrolling. Sound familiar? Let me ask you something. When was the last time that you checked your screen time report? But here's what's wild. Studies have shown that the average time a teenager spends on their phone is about 7 hours per day. That's the average. This does not include time spending watching TV, playing video games, or using your computers for your homework. 7 hours. That's like watching the entire Lord of the Rings trilogy every day. Have you ever stopped to think about what we might be missing out on during those 7 hours? What relationships aren't we building? What conversations are we not having? What parts of life are we just scrolling past? You know, in the Bible, there is a word for something that occupies an unbalanced portion of our attention. And the word that the Bible uses is idol. Now, when we hear the word idol, we might think of ancient statues or golden calves. But what if I told you that the most powerful idols in our lives aren't made of gold or stone? What if they're made of glass and aluminum and fit right in our pockets? But it's not just our phones, is it? All right, let's be real. Most of us have a complicated relationship with money too. Whether it's wanting the latest iPhone, the coolest shoes, or just feeling like we never quite have enough money or stuff. Money and stuff also have a way of consuming our thoughts and attention. So tonight we're going to be talking about modern idols, the things that compete for first place in our lives. Now, before you say, but I don't even have a phone, or I don't even get an allowance, so I don't ever have money. Well, it's probably good to call out that pretty much anything can be an idol. So even though we're going to talk mostly about what it looks like to have a healthier relationship with our phone and our money, a lot of what we will be talking about could just as easily apply to your new kicks or your Pokemon collection or being first chair in the school orchestra, making the teams, or any number of things. Now let's look at what the Apostle Paul wrote to a group of Jesus followers in the first century in the city of Corinth. And now at the time that Paul was writing his letter, the city of Corinth was basically the equivalent to the ads on your Instagram feed. It was a city full of distractions where everyone and everything was competing for everyone's attention. So here's what Paul wrote in 1 Corinthians chapter 10. So my dear friends, flee from the worship of idols. You are reasonable people. Decide for yourselves if what I am saying is true. Now, before we dive deeper into these verses, I want to give you a tiny bit more of context about the city of Corinth. Corinth wasn't just a city filled with markets and theaters. It was also a city filled with temples to different gods. And because it was a major port on the Mediterranean Sea, the population of the city was incredibly diverse. The city was packed with people from every corner of the known world, each bringing their own gods and ways of worship. You want to worship Apollo? Well, there's a temple for that. You want to leave an offering for Aphrodite? Head down the street. You need to pray to Poseidon before a sea voyage? They had you covered. They even had a catch-all temple called the Pantheon. It's kind of like an ancient religious food court where you could worship any god you wanted. But these temples weren't just buildings. In a lot of ways, they were the social media platforms of their day. That's where the people went to be seen, to feel connected, and to find out the latest gossip about their neighbor's, sister's, cousin's ex-boyfriend. To say the least, the temples were a crucial part of everyday life in Corinth. And Paul's readers, they would have passed these temples every day. They would have smelled the incense, heard the music, and seen their friends and neighbors worshiping there. The pull, it was constant and it was real. Notice how Paul doesn't just say, hey, maybe consider cutting back on your idol worship. Instead, he says, flee. That's not a casual suggestion. That's a desperate warning. It's like when you are walking next to your school's baseball field when the team is practicing and someone yells, duck. You duck. You don't ask any questions. Or you're on the golf course and someone yells, four. But to understand why Paul is so adamant that we flee from the worship of idols, we have to back up a few verses. In 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 12, Paul writes, if you think you are standing strong, be careful not to fall. The temptations in your life are no different from what others experience, and God is faithful. He will not allow the temptation to be more than you can stand. When you are tempted, he will show you a way out so that you can endure. Paul is saying something profound here. He is saying that the feeling of being drawn to these idols, it's normal. The Corinthians felt it being surrounded by temples to other gods. And as a teenager, I'm sure you feel it. Suddenly, having access to your own phone and your own money for the first time. To say that phones and money can be tempting is an understatement. Thankfully, Paul is also saying that God will always provide a way out when we are tempted. As we consider what Paul is saying to the Corinthians about idols and how it applies to our lives today, there are a few key truths that I think we need to understand. And the first is this: not all idols are obvious. What does the word obvious mean? Do what? Clear to see. Perfect definition. Right? That is obviously a Dr. Pepper can, right? Says Dr. Pepper on it. Looks like Dr. Pepper. Smells like Dr. Pepper. It's 23 flavors of goodness, right? It's obvious. The Corinthians had it easy in one way. Their idols were obvious. You see, when Paul wrote to the Corinthians about fleeing from idols, his readers knew exactly what he was talking about. The temples were right there throughout the entire city. They were impossible to miss. But our idols, they're sneaky. They don't announce themselves as idols. They don't have massive temples where we go to worship them. Instead, they disguise themselves as a necessary part of our lives. And what makes our potential idols even more tricky is that most of them, they start out as things that are both good and helpful for our lives. I mean, if you think about it, your phone, it is an incredible tool for communication, for learning, and even entertainment. It helps you connect in other ways that were impossible even 20 or 30 years ago. And money, it's the same thing. It's a necessary part of life. It's what powers our economy and how most people get the food that they need and how they pay for the homes where they live. And if we choose to be generous with our money, money has the capacity to be an incredible tool to improve the lives of others. But here's the tricky part. And I want you to listen to this. Even good things can become idols when they start taking up more space in our lives than they should. For example, have you ever noticed how often you pick up your phone without actually having a reason? Actually, let's do a little test right here. Just a second, I'm going to put up a few statements on the screen, and don't worry, you don't have to answer out loud, okay? Keep this to yourself. But give yourself a point for each of the statements that apply to you, all right? Check this out. I regularly check my phone even when I'm having a face-to-face conversation with someone else. I tend to feel anxious when I leave my phone in another room. I regularly think I feel my phone buzz even though there are no notifications when I check. I often start using my phone even though I don't have a specific purpose in mind. I'm usually the first person to realize when the Wi-Fi goes down. I'm usually surprised at how high my screen time is each day. Okay, now I'm not saying that if you score a 4 or higher, your phone has necessarily become an idol. But I do think that these types of questions are helpful when we are trying to identify the idols in our lives. Because not all idols are obvious. The second idea that I want to make sure that we don't miss is this. Idols make promises they can't keep. The temples in Corinth, they promised all sorts of things. Success, happiness, and connection with the divine. Today's idols make similar promises. Your phones promise to keep you connected, informed, and entertained. Money promises security, happiness, and freedom. But just like the idols of ancient Corinth, our modern idols can't deliver on their promises. And whether you want to admit it or not, I think deep down that we all know that no amount of scrolling will fill the need for real connections with people. No number of likes will satisfy our desire to truly be known and valued. And no amount of money can provide the security that only comes from knowing God. That's why Paul tells the Corinthians to flee from idols. He knows that idols are not just harmless distractions. They're competitors for the place in our lives that should belong to God alone. And when we give them that place, in the long run, they will always disappoint us. The last idea that I want to point out is freedom requires action. Remember, Paul didn't just say, hey, recognize idols, or think about possibly considering at some point in the future moving slightly away from your worship of idols. No, he said flee, run away, get away from. And I think that Paul knew that we aren't always the best at setting boundaries for ourselves. For example, I know that some of you are terrible at saving money. The second you get money, it is burning a hole in your pocket, and you spend it as fast as you get it. It's hard for you to save up for any big ticket item that you want. But in a lot of ways, it was similar for the people of Corinth. Part of the reason they found it difficult to keep God as their first priority was because they weren't putting enough distance between themselves and their temptation. Think about it like this. You have a struggle with something. Would you go sit in front of what you are struggling with and say, I'm okay? The truth is, whether we are talking about our phones, money, or literal stone idols, breaking free from idols isn't passive. It requires decisive action. It means making tough choices about what gets our time, our attention, and our heart. So what does it mean for us? What can we do about this? Well, there's 3 practical steps that I think we can take. And the first is this: identify your potential idols. Not everyone is going to have the same idols. But before we can make any changes, we need to be honest with ourselves about what might be becoming an idol in our lives. Similar to the little quiz we already did about our phones, here's one that you could do to help you identify if money has become an idol in your life. Again, don't answer out loud, but give yourself 1 point for each statement that you think is true for you. I tend to judge the worth of others by how much money they have, the brands they wear, or the possessions they own. I tend to judge my own worth based on how much money I have, the brands I wear, and the possessions I own. When I receive a birthday or Christmas card, I'm disappointed when there isn't money inside. I would never consider giving my own money to a charitable cause. I find it difficult to share with others. I find it difficult to be happy when I can't afford something I want. I tend to be happiest when I am spending money. Again, I'm not saying that if you score 4 or higher that money has necessarily become an idol in your life, but I would say that questions like these, again, are a great way to identify whether or not you might be in danger of valuing your phone or your money in a way that is not healthy. And whether you score 2 or 7 on our quizzes, either way, I think that it would be good for all of us to, number 2, is create intentional boundaries. Remember how Paul said to flee from idols, to get away from them? That means putting some real distance between us and the things that tend to steal our attention from what matters most. Now, how you do that might be a little different from everyone, but here's a few ideas to get you started. If you want to start creating intentional boundaries with your phone, you might try deleting the apps that waste the most time, or setting your screen time limit, or better yet, asking a trusted adult to set a screen time for you with a passcode that you don't know, or turning off non-essential notifications, or keeping your phone in another room when you're studying, eating dinner during your quiet time, or sleeping. And if you want to start creating intentional boundaries with your money, you might try creating a simple budget to plan out how you want to spend your money ahead of time, or setting a savings goal with a specific deadline, like I want to save $300 by June 30th, or setting a limit on how much money you'll carry with you at any given time, so you don't just blow it because you have it in your pocket. Or ask a parent about setting up a savings account at a bank, or establishing a rhythm of giving money to a charitable cause. Again, no one can force you to do these things, but I want to encourage you to at least try a few of them. And if you do, I would be willing to bet that you'll find that your phone and your money start to become less and less of an idol in your life. And as you do that, you'll also start to notice your priorities shifting. Phones and money might become less of a priority, which is good, but you'll still need to choose what gets to take their place. That's why the final challenge that I want to challenge you with, or the final step that I want to challenge you with, is this, is to put God first. Because here's the thing about idols. They don't just magically disappear when we try to remove them from our lives. That space needs to be filled with something else. Otherwise, we will just end up going right back to our old habits. And Jesus actually talked about this in Matthew. Right, Matthew chapter 6, this is what Jesus said. Seek the kingdom of God above all else, and live righteously, and he will give you everything you need. I want to challenge you to take just 15 minutes of time that you would normally spend scrolling on your phone or thinking about how you will spend your money, and instead spend time with God. Although there are a ton of different ways that you could choose to do this, here's a few ideas to get you started. Read a chapter from your Bible. Write in a journal about what God has done in your life today, this week, this month. Take time to pray for each of your friends or your family members by name. Go for a walk in nature and just have a conversation with God. Listen to worship music without scrolling on any other apps on your phone. So before we go, I do want to admit that shifting your priorities can potentially be really difficult. But I want to remind you of what Paul said at the end of the passage from 1 Corinthians. You remember this? God is faithful. He will not allow the temptation to be more than you can stand. When you are tempted, he will show you a way out so that you can endure. That means with God's help, you absolutely can break free from anything that has become or is becoming an idol in your life.